Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Okay, so we're in the final chapter of The Visible and the Invisible, the intertwining, the chiasm. And this is the last chapter. It was unfinished. This is where what Merleau-Ponty was working on at the time of his death. So we'll just run through this. It's going to take maybe, I expect, if things work out well, 3 videos. If they take a little bit longer, 4 videos. So that's kind of the timeline for this. Today's video, there are 3 parts to it. The first is just kind of a review and setting us up for the rest of the video. And then the other 2 parts, the scene and the SEER. Kind of a similar format that we've followed before, but expanding on what we've talked about in the past, and also drilling in on these ideas of the intertwining or the chiasm, and flesh as well will come to the fore here. So the first part is the question. Essentially here, I just wanted to throw up a quote which summarizes what we've talked about in earlier videos. What there is then are not things first identical with themselves, which would then offer themselves to the seer, nor is there a seer who is first empty and who afterward would open himself to them, but something to which we could not be closer than by palpating it with our look. Things we could not dream of seeing all naked, because the gaze itself envelops them, clothes them with its own flesh. So this is just really recapping all of the things we've talked about up until now. There is no thing independent, isolated, a thing in itself, a thing as it really is. There is no seer, independent and isolated first. Rather, there is this something, those 2 components are abstracted out from a more originary whole, which we called a few videos back the visible present. And there's nothing that we can see all naked, because we can't, so that's the essence. We don't see an actual essence because the thing itself is always clothed. It always appears with the empirical qualities and attributes that we see it with. There's nothing beyond that. There's nothing underneath that. There's no kernel of truth or essence to the thing, because the thing is what it is, what it's presented as, what it presents itself as. So the question then that the heading of this section refers to is this one. How is it that our gaze, in enveloping the thing from a distance, at the same time unveils while appearing to leave it in its place, such that the vision we acquire of the thing seems to come from it? So how is it that even though, so we perceive the thing from a distance, and this unveils it, this reveals it to us, it discloses it to us, but at the same time we don't absorb it into us. It still appears as something independent from us. It appears as something separate from us. It appears as if the vision that we have of it seems to come from it, and not something that is being that has been generated before the seer and the scene kind of can be appreciated as abstractions of this more original thing. So how does this come about? What's the process behind it? And to explore this, Merleau-Ponty discusses the 2 aspects of vision, or more generally perception, which we have talked about before, which we've broken up vision or perception into before in order to deal with this, the scene and the seer. But like I said in the introduction, this will build on that, on what we've already talked about, go a little bit beyond it, and also focus in more on the ideas of the intertwining in the first place, and in the second place the flesh. So the first aspect of this then is the scene. So we're talking about the thing that is seen, and Merleau-Ponty chooses to explore this through qualities, and specifically he takes up the quality red. So he says, "This red under my eyes is not, as is always said, a quail, a pellicle of being without thickness. It requires a focusing, however brief. It emerges from a less precise, more general redness, in which my gaze was caught, into which it sank before, as we put it so aptly, fixing it." So the first thing here is that qualities, in this case the red, are not qualia. So the red is not a quail. And qualia are they're like the current understanding of understanding of consciousness. Qualia are like the building blocks of experience. So if you see an object, for example, the current explanations of consciousness hold that it's made up of a collection of like sub experiences, if you like redness, and if it's round in shape, there's a roundness qualia, and if it's hard, there's a hardness qualia, a quail I should say. And all of these qualia build together to make your conscious experience. But the notion of qualia is an abstract notion, and it's derived from our assembly way of thinking. So we think that a perception is made up of pieces: redness, roundness, softness, and so on. And this is why Merleau-Ponty calls it a pellicle of being without thickness. It has no depth to it. It's a very superficial way of thinking about this. And so he's dismissing that. I've written an article on this, by the way, if you're interested, called The Qualia Delusion, which explains this in more detail, not based on what Merleau-Ponty says, but a similar kind of argument. So Merleau-Ponty is not interested in the idea of qualia. That idea takes something which is originally whole and complete, given to us at once, the experience, whatever it is, and it breaks it up and tries to understand it by demolishing it. And when you try and understand something that is whole, you try and understand that by picking it to pieces, you get an interesting and a perhaps convincing sounding picture, but one that isn't ultimately real. And there's a lot more to be said about that, but Merleau-Ponty said a lot more about that in the Phenomenology of Perception. Bergson says a lot about it as well. At the end of the day, qualia are not the way to go forward here. And he says, though, something which will lead us into the next quote: our perception of this red emerges from a less precise, more general redness. And that's the key, that's the segue into the next quote. This red is what it is only by connecting up from its place with other reds about it, with which it forms a constellation, or with other colours it dominates or that dominate it, that it attracts or that attract it, that it repels or that repel it. In short, it is a certain node in the woof of the simultaneous and the successive. It is a concretion of visibility. It is not an atom. The red dress a fortiori holds with all its fibres onto the fabric of the visible, and thereby onto a fabric of invisible being. a punctuation in the field of red things, which includes the tiles of rooftops, the flags of gatekeepers and of the revolution, certain terrains near Ai or in Madagascar. It is also a punctuation in the field of red garments, which includes, along with the dresses of women, robes of professors, bishops, and advocate generals, and also in the field of adornments and that of uniforms. And its red literally is not the same as it appears in one constellation or in the other. Okay, so I kept a lot of the information in that quote because I just wanted to give you the full sense of it, the way that Merleau-Ponty is intending his idea to be understood here. And there are a few things to note. First, the red that we perceive, this specific red, is what it is only as a variant of a wider milieu with which it maintains a relation. So he talked about dominating or dominated, attracting, attracted, repelling, repelled. So it has this connection to a background on which it stands out. And this goes back to Merleau-Ponty's Gestalt roots. But you can see what he's getting at here. This red makes sense only within this wider context of other red things. And a red grasped in one constellation, in one background, on one background or in one milieu, is quite different from a red grasped in another. So that background, that milieu, that constellation is important in our perception of this red, even though we're not necessarily perceiving all of these other, the milieu. The red that we end up perceiving is influenced by this background, or even maybe a better way to put it is the meaning that we get from this red. What this red means is informed by this background. Okay, second, the red as what it is best characterized as a node in the woof of the simultaneous and the successive. Another expression Merleau-Ponty uses, a concretion of visibility, or a punctuation in a field. So it's something, and this is related to the first point, but something which is defined more by its surroundings than as something positive in and of itself. So again, so just think about this. It's something that, rather than being, as Merleau-Ponty says, an atom itself, rather than being some kind of positive thing, it's actually what's the better way to understand it is as a point within this broader totality. And this leads into the third point I want to make, which is the red then, as I said, is not an atom. It's not a chunk of absolutely hard, indivisible being. It's not a positive thing. Rather, it is a sort of straits between exterior horizons and interior horizons, a certain differentiation, an ephemeral modulation of this world, less a colour or a thing, therefore, than a difference between things and colours. And that's really the point I wanted to make. It's a difference rather than a positive thing in itself. It marks a point of differentiation rather than being an actual positive atom of something itself. And that's why I like this way of thinking of this red as a punctuation in a field. It's not a thing in and of itself. It's just a marker within this broader context. And it's therefore characterized more by difference than by identity. So it functions as a differentiating point rather than functioning as a point which is identical with itself, which is what it is, which is something positive in and of itself. Instead of that, it focuses our attention on a part of the milieu and draws our attention to perhaps a gradient between different parts of that milieu. So take away the milieu and you take away the red, because it is what it is only as difference, only as a differentiating factor. So the next point is that the red is the visible which arises on an invisible milieu. Between the alleged colours and visibles, we would find anew the tissue that lines them, sustains them, nourishes them, and which for its part is not a thing, but a possibility, a latency, and a flesh of things. So the importance here of the invisible and calling this milieu the invisible. That's what this background is. It's invisible, not because we can't see it. We can direct our attention to any point in that milieu that we like. But when we do, the rest of the milieu becomes unperceived, becomes in that sense invisible. So the invisible background, the background that we don't perceive, is what makes the visible, which is perceived on it, possible. It is what makes the visible thing, in this case the red, it's what makes that red the red that it is. Between the nodes, the punctuations, the visibles, there is a field, milieu, tissue, Merleau-Ponty says, and invisible that nourishes and sustains them. So that's just another way of thinking about this field, this background, and connecting it to the title of the book, The Visible and the Invisible. Also, with that quote, flesh is brought out into the open as that invisible milieu. The invisible, which is possibility or latency. So it's a background which, what it is it also is not anything concrete, anything positive in and of itself. It's a possibility. It's a latency. It exists as that from which something visible can arise, can emerge from. So this is what Merleau-Ponty calls the flesh of things. He also calls it somewhere in a different section a prototype of being, not a thing in itself, but the capacity as an invisible milieu for things to arise. So that's another piece of the puzzle, if you like, regarding what flesh is. Flesh as this invisible milieu which provides the foundation or the stage on which visible things can appear, objects, qualities, anything like that. And this, by the way, is very hard to read this. If you've read Deleuze's Difference in Repetition, very hard to read this and not see a direct parallel to Deleuze's point in Deleuze's ideas, I guess, in Difference in Repetition, where you have this virtual background, he calls it, and on that, and that is nothing in and of itself, it's nothing positive, but out of that emerges, you get these gradients arise and the differences that emerge within this virtual milieu produce concrete things. And although the difference is that in Deleuze, it's all taking place at the level of metaphysics. For Merleau-Ponty, this is all happening, as I've said, ad nauseum probably, at the level of ontology. But yeah, a really striking similarity there anyway. So the second aspect of this, of experience, perception here, and the third part of the video is the SEER. So turning to the other side now of the experience, the SEER, we have the look, and the way that Merleau-Ponty says it envelops, palpates, and espouses visible things. This kind of language tells us that Merleau-Ponty sees this as the mark of an intimate relationship here. It's in Phenomenology of Perception, he described it as a communion with things. So he sees a very intimate and a very visceral, if you like, relationship in the look, in our engagement with things. And it's so intimate, so foundational, that it appears as though this relation is one of pre-established harmony between us and the things that we're looking at. Or as he also describes it, as if there is a prepossession of the visible, so that we have it before we even know that we've got it. And that's the way it does appear, right? That's the way it feels. In order to, when we live our lives, we don't actually recognize the way that we interact and engage with objects. It happens so naturally. It's so innate in us that there is this connection. Just the connection itself is invisible to us in our daily lives because it's so innate, it's so intrinsic to what it is to be a human being that we don't recognize it. So we're really pulling this deeply intimate and fundamental aspect of human lives and perception, and that relation with things, we're bringing that out so that we can explore it, investigate it, understand it. And Merleau-Ponty says here that when we look at something, we don't look at chaos, but at things. We don't see a mass of shapes and colours and sounds and textures that we then have to put together, that we have to assemble into something. Rather, we just see the things directly. We grasp them, we touch them directly. We don't have to assemble our perceptions. And this takes place, the way that this takes place is so natural that it's unclear, Merleau-Ponty says, if it's the look or if it's the things that command. So it's unclear to us when we look at this relationship whether it's an active one or a passive one, because it's so natural, it's so innate. We don't know if we are doing something to make the thing appear. That's the typical modern view of consciousness. Qualia is a part of that. We assemble all these different qualia into conscious experiences. Or if it's passive, so if we're just receiving, we're just, things themselves are telling us what they look like. The qualities that we perceive are coming directly from things. There is no, we can't discern that because it just happens so naturally. This communion, the word communion, it's so originary. It's foundational. It's fundamental to our lives. We don't even know. We can't tell by looking at it whether it's active or passive. So the question that Merleau-Ponty's kind of looking at here is, how does the look of the seer envelop the visible things as if it already knew them? How does my perception approach these things and grasp them as if there was already this pre-established harmony between me and the things? So to answer this, Merleau-Ponty looks at touch. And the reason he looks at touch, he says, is that through this sensory modality, the questioner and the questioned are manifestly closer. That the relationship between the two sides, the two parties, if you like, is naturally more intimate. And so this gives us a better sense of this. It gives us a better avenue through which to understand the question, because the question is about this intimacy that we have in this relationship with things. So for my hands to be able to learn something about the things they touch, Merleau-Ponty says there must be a prior relationship between the two. And here's the quote: "Between the exploration and what it will teach me, between my movements and what I touch, there must exist some relationship by principle, some kinship, according to which they are not only, like the pseudopods of the amoeba, vague and ephemeral deformations of the corporeal space, but the initiation to and the opening upon a tactile world. This can happen only if my hand, while it is felt from within, is also accessible from without, itself tangible. For my other hand, for example, if it takes its place among the things it touches, is in a sense one of them, opens finally upon a tangible being of which it is also a part. Through this crisscrossing within it of the touching and the tangible, its own movements incorporate themselves into the universe they interrogate, are recorded on the same map as it." So in general, this whole quote, we've talked about this in earlier videos, so I don't think there's anything particularly new here. But in general, a thing can reveal only if it is itself capable of being revealed, only if it is, in a sense, one of the things it reveals, an opening upon a thing of which it is also a part. So with regards to the touch must itself be tangible, or the touching. So when you're touching with your left hand, and this was a big thing for Merleau-Ponty, you touch with the left, but that touching hand can also become touched when my right hand covers it, and my right hand now is the touching, my left hand is the thing being touched. So it has to have that double aspect. And Merleau-Ponty spends a lot of time talking about the hands with regards to this. That's what we're talking about with touch, because it brings out this idea so viscerally, so clearly. But in general, a thing can reveal only if it is itself capable of being revealed. And that's our link to the body itself, the human body in general. And the main thing from this quote then, because we've talked about this before, I don't think there's anything particularly new, but the main thing is this crisscrossing that Merleau-Ponty talks about, the crisscrossing within it of the touching and the tangible. And that is the intertwining, or the chiasm. Well, I call this one the first meaning of the chiasm, because in a moment we'll talk about another way that the chiasm manifests. But yeah, so this is, like I said, we've covered this. We've talked about the way that the body is our opening onto the world and things. But in order to be that opening, it must be in the world like the other things that it is grasping, that it is perceiving. But it can't be in the world exactly the same as other things, or it wouldn't be conscious. There would be no grasping, right? If I was exactly the same as a table, I couldn't perceive the table because tables don't perceive. So I'm in the world like a table, but a kind of a special table, if you like, a table that has the ability to perceive. So a table with this double aspect. But the point is that I'm not something different. I'm not completely removed. I'm not a different kind of thing, a mind as opposed to matter, for example. I'm in the world as a body like other bodies, but my body has this capacity to function as an opening onto other bodies. And that capacity, that crisscrossing for my body to be touched and touching, seeing and seen, all of those we can cross those over at with regard to any and all senses, and that is what Merleau-Ponty means when he talks about the intertwining. This double aspect, this crossing over of these two capacities within the body that is the human body. So that's fine. Merleau-Ponty notes that it's also no different for vision, as I just did as well. But he says then one might argue that the exploration and information gathered in vision belongs to a different sense than the one in touch. So we're dealing with two separate modes of inquiry, if you like, into the world. Merleau-Ponty's not keen on that. So he says this delimitation of the senses is crude. And I've got a quote which we can look at to explore this idea. We must habituate ourselves to think that every visible is cut out in the tangible, every tactile being in some manner promised to visibility, and that there is infringement, not only between the touched and the touching, but also between the tangible and the visible. Since the same body sees and touches, visible and tangible belong to the same world. It is a marvel too little noticed that every movement of my eyes, even more every displacement of my body, has its place in the same visible universe that I itemize and explore with them, as conversely every vision takes place somewhere in the tactile space. There is double and crossed situating of the visible in the tangible and of the tangible in the visible. So different modalities are not different lenses of viewing the same reality. They're not separate and isolated functions, which again we would have to bring together and assemble to create our conscious experience. That's a fragmented way of thinking of experience, and it doesn't give us, it's a reflective way of thinking about it as well. It's how we understand the thing when we take our scientific mindset and try and understand it by breaking it apart and seeing what it's made of. That gives you abstract components, but it doesn't, when you put those components back together, you don't get the original whole which you were originally trying to understand. So we can't understand different senses as completely different ways of accessing the world and things. They're not even two incomplete or partial maps that would need to be combined to get a complete picture. We want to get away from this way of thinking that it's piecemeal, that it's fragmented and broken up, and we have to assemble it, and we have to assemble our experience. We have to assemble these components to get our complete experience. Rather, for Merleau-Ponty, these different senses, they interweave, they infringe on each other from the beginning. There is no fundamental difference between them. They work together such that every visible is cut out in the tangible, and every tactile being is in some manner promised to visibility. And I quite like what he says here about it's a marvel too little noticed that every movement of my eyes, every displacement of my body has its place in the same visible universe that I explore with those eyes. So that movement, which is more related to kinesthetic aspect of my body, the to touch rather than vision, is so deeply connected to vision, because the very movement, in order to see, I have to move. I have to engage my body as if it was something I could touch and manipulate. That in order to see, I have to do that. I have to treat my body in this, I have to deal with my body in this very tactile fashion by physically moving it in certain ways. And my eyes especially, I have to physically move my eyes in order to see. There's a deep connection there. Everything, every vision takes place somewhere in the tactile space. Everything I see is tactile. It's graspable. It's touchable. There is no clear-cut division between them. These are not isolated and independent avenues of inquiry. And surely, although Merleau-Ponty doesn't say it, surely the same holds for other sensory modalities as well. Since the same body sees and touches, visible and tangible belong to the same world. That's a quote. And that puts us back into the body. So since it's the same body that is accessing the world, that has this communion with the world, that has this intimate relationship, every mode of access that is open to me interweaves and is interlaced with every other mode of access. It's not that there is, again, back to this way of thinking, this reflective way of thinking, where everything's broken up and we have to reassemble to get our experience. It's all happening from this same opening onto the world, this opening which is my body. And anyway, this way that the senses infringe upon each other and interweave with each other, this double and crossed situating that Merleau-Ponty talks about, is also a kind of intertwining or chiasm. And so I call this the second meaning of the chiasm here, because it's pretty much anytime I think you have a situation where there is this kind of crossing, this interweaving. Anytime you have that, you have, and it is ontologically significant. So anytime it has a kind of foundational role in our perception and our understanding, anytime you have this intertwining of different aspects or features, that can be brought under the heading of Merleau-Ponty's intertwining or chiasm. So we've seen a couple of ways that the chiasm is expressed in this video. And the first was the body itself. So the body as both touched and touching, seen and seeing, both in the world and as something which is an opening onto the world. So that was the first meaning of the chiasm, and the second meaning is the way that the different sensory modalities intertwine and cross over, such that there is no clear division between them. Rather, they each interweave in such a way that the experience is brought together as a whole without having to be assembled from different disparate elements. And that is where I'm going to finish up today and take you into the summary. So first up, we looked at the question for us, which kind of guided us in this video, was how do we see the thing as it is while at the same time being separated from it, being removed from it, being at a distance from it. And we analysed this question through two aspects. The scene was the first one, and here we were dealing with qualities in particular, investigated specifically through the colour red. And Merleau-Ponty's first point with this is that qualities, or our experience of the thing, the visible thing, the seen thing, is not composed of qualia. Qualia are abstract. They are things without thickness or depth. They are a consequence of that reflective mode of understanding, a way of understanding that analyzes, dissects, breaks things down to grasp them. And that's not... And when you do that, you don't get a complete understanding of the thing itself, because once you break something down and piece it back together, you don't get the original thing anymore. The scene was composed of visible qualities, then, which appear within an invisible milieu. And this was really the main idea here, that only in this way does the thing appear as what it is. Only on a background which is not perceived can the perceived thing appear. Only on a background of qualities that we don't grasp can a visible quality appear as what it is. So it's not a positive thing. The quality that we grasp is not itself a positive thing. Rather, it's characterized by difference. As Merleau-Ponty said, it's a straits between exterior and interior horizons. It itself is not a thing identical in itself. Rather, it functions as a differentiating point. It draws our attention to a broader field, a broader milieu, in which we can detect differences. And the thing itself is just a specific difference, a point of difference. Again, not an atom of something positive. And another key idea from this section was the flesh of things. And this usage of the word flesh for Merleau-Ponty here referred to the invisible milieu, which is possibility or latency. Again, nothing tangible, nothing real, nothing concrete, but to use a Delusion word, it's virtual. It serves as the background, the context within which and out of which a concrete positive object can appear. Then we turn to look at the other side, the SEER, and this was investigated through touch, because touch is the best modality to bring out the closeness of our relationship with things. And we said that a thing can reveal only if it is capable of being revealed. That was the general takeaway. The vision is always itself visible. Touch is always itself tangible. And it must be this way. If it wasn't this way, our vision wouldn't be able to see anything. Our touch wouldn't be able to touch anything if the opening on the world wasn't the same as the things in the world. And this Crisscrossing is the meaning of the intertwining or the chiasm. The way that there's this double aspect, there's this crossover within the human body between revealing and being revealed, between seeing, being seen, and so on and so forth. And then we looked at the sensory modalities themselves and the way that they infringe on each other from the very beginning. Every visible, Merleau-Ponty said, is cut out of the tangible, and every tactile being is promised to visibility. So there is another crossing here between sensory modalities. They are not separate, isolated functions, which we then have to assemble together. From the very beginning, they all emerge from the same body. They all operate through the same body, and that means they are a unitary phenomenon. They appear separate, and we grasp things in different modalities in different ways, but from the very beginning, they exist within a sensory realm which is whole. We're not compiling our experiences by aggregating different sensory input. That might be the actual scientific explanation. That might be the physical description of what's actually happening in the body and the brain. But we're investigating being. We're investigating what it is to perceive, not the physical goings on in the body as a physical instrument. And so this gives us another kind of crisscrossing, a double and crossed situating, Merleau-Ponty called it, and this is also the way that the intertwining or the chiasm manifest. And that's us. So the intertwining or the chiasm from this opening section is, it's pretty much anything I think that where any situation where you have this kind of crossover, any kind of situation where you have this crossover and which is ontologically fundamental, which is a core essential component of our experience. When you have that, then you have what Merleau-Ponty is calling here the intertwining or the chiasm. The next video is going to be, it's pretty much going to continue on exactly from where we left off today. The only reason I didn't keep going was because I think this is, to go any further, this video would end up going over an hour. I think there are no more natural places to stop after this. So this was probably the best choice, I think, to break here. We'll pick up the conversation again in the next video. I'm hoping that I can do the video next week. I'm not sure if I can or not. There might be a 2-week break coming because of work. So yeah, we'll see. There might be a little hiatus coming, but I'll do my best. Whatever happens, 2 or 3 more videos to go, and then we're done with this. So that'll be nice to get this under the belt. Anyway, let me sign off here. Thanks for watching. Hope it helped, and I'll see you next time.